Well, hello. Well, hello, Brett.
Hello.
Well, hello, my. Jesus Christ. Hello. Hey, how's everybody? Welcome back.
Hello.
Welcome back to the Censored Podcast.
Yes.
Mike always looks like he's on the lower floor. His camera's up above somewhere.
I'm gonna call.
I switched it this week. I'm not on my laptop, so
I'm gonna call him Mezzanine Mike Manley.
There you go.
I'm a wee person. I'm a
Does
wee
that mean
person.
does that mean we get to throw popcorn at him?
Yeah. Welcome you guys back to Pencil to Pencil, your favorite pandemic podcast. The gang is all here. Welcome back. I'm Jamar Nicholas, Philadelphia's favorite son, and your internet best friend. I'm joined by my good buddies, Brett Blevins. Hey, Brett. And also my good bud, Mike Manley. Say hi, Mike.
Hello.
It's like you're trapped in the Matrix. As always, our Wednesday and Saturday podcast is brought to you by Clip Studio Paint. The fine fellows and lovely ladies over at Graphicsly produced this fine product. And also our good buddy John Morrow over at twomorrows.com, where the legacy and history of comics is alive. Please visit his website and buy some of his stuff so we can all eat. Thank you. How's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
You know,
I've had a very busy week of physical labor again, but I'm good today. I actually feel kind of loose today. I repaired my entire front stoop and reconcreted stuff and everything.
Wow. Well, you look big, Brett. You look like you've been spread out. You're lifting. Yeah.
Remember a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Jorge Sufino and taking him up to meet Al Williamson? I actually found that page.
Well, hold on. Let me give you the screen. Go ahead.
Here's a copy of the page that he traded Al for.
Wow.
Very, very Fostery.
Remember that, Brett?
Yeah. Very, very Hal Foster looking.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's
gorgeous. A character called Wolf.
With a U or an O?
With a O.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
You know, I didn't find it because it was in my folder that said Frank Frazetta, which also has it's funny that what that folder has also has some sketches by weird sketches by Brett from some pose or something, and then it also has a whole bunch of Xeroxes of a John Buscema.
Oh wow! Look at that.
Job.
Cool.
So, yeah, Xeroxes of a I think it's a Cull, King Cull.
Yeah, I can see that. Look at that.
Wow, nice cats.
Yeah, you know, it's always great at drawing. He's like Frazetta. He's one of those guys who's always great at drawing animals.
Yeah.
So he was really good at drawing all the stuff. Like, here's a good page. All that.
Well, we should bring Michael in so he can look at this too.
Yeah, he's in the green room eating up all the grapes, so maybe we should bring him in. That's beautiful. Guys, I'm very excited to introduce our guest for the evening. Michael Cho is backstage waiting to come out here and talk shop with us. Michael Cho is an acclaimed illustrator who's done work for almost everybody who means anything in the business. And I don't think he'd be surprised to know that we're all fans of his. I see his eyebrows raised in the green room. He's like, oh yeah. We're going to have a really great talk. For anybody that's joining us for the first time on YouTube or Facebook, here's some housekeeping. Feel free to interact with us. This is a live show. You're more than welcome to ask questions, have comments, as long as they're tasteful and relevant. I am going to be swimming through the stream while we're talking. If you have a comment or a question that I think would add value to our conversation, I'll put it on the screen. If I don't get to it, don't get sad. but also see how you can get involved. All right, I'm very excited. All right, so let's bring Michael in and let's get this conversation started. Ew, what's up, brother?
Doing great. Thanks for having me here. I feel like I'm on like the Brady Bunch opening, you know. I don't know if I'm Marsha or Greg or
Well, if we switch to Hollywood Squares, I want to be Paul Lynde.
You want to be Paul Lynde? I actually that reference.
Awesome.
Wasn't he replaced by Charles Nelson Riley, or was that?
Yeah. No, I think Paul Lynde was first, then Charles Nelson Riley, and then Jim J. Bullock came along. Later.
Right.
And then was Whoopi, and then Whoopi Goldberg, I think, was the center square for a while.
It's not on anymore, right?
I don't think so. I don't. What is on at this point?
It's been so long since I watched any kind of like PM magazine TV or anything they would have, a current affair or any of those. Yeah.
Oh, really? 90s. A current affairs. Has that actually been on in the last like 20 years?
I don't know. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just saying. Wasn't that was Bill O'Reilly, right?
Yeah.
On that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, all that stuff got replaced by TMZ and those type of like hot potato social, influencer news, right? That's all anybody cares about now.
Seeing celebrities like fart in a hot tub or something, right?
Yeah, that's on my DVR. It's just fart in a hot tub at 7:30. Guys, I was hoping that we could take up a little bit of Michael's time to maybe talk a little bit about his career. And it's great, Michael, that when I asked you to be on and you actually said yes. I'm very excited about that. You
can still change your mind. You can still change your mind now. You can just
delete. I've been saying on the program for a while, asking people to be on your podcast is like asking people to help you move a couch.
or do your taxes.
It's like, yeah, okay, what Friday? I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
But I think we have a really good return on investment here, pencil to pencil. Everybody has a great time, and we get to chop it up and talk shop. So I'm going to turn my attention to the chat room. Mike and Brett, if you want to maybe get the questions started.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would just love to hear about Michael's early influences and what led him in the direction that he followed.
That's like a really, we could spend like 3 hours on that. When I was a kid, my early influences were Marvel Comics, right? So I was like, and I grew up in South Korea, so even before Marvel Comics, it was like giant robot type TV shows because I was a kid who drew like since I was 3. It's one of my earliest memories. So you gravitate toward anything that is visual. When I came to Canada, one of the things I did was I gravitated toward comic books because it was the art form that was visual, that was immediately accessible to a child, right? It was that and Saturday morning cartoons. And then I went to art. By the time I was like 15, I wanted to be a painter and like a fine arts painter and an illustrator. And then I went to art college. So in art college, I studied like contemporary art. So I have contemporary art influences. Like I love artists like Gerhard Richter, James Rosenquist, Edward Hopper, more contemporary artists like David Sally and things like that. But then when I got out of school and I started working as an illustrator, one of the things that that stuck with me was that I had a large background in appreciation of comics. And so my illustration work was very comics based, but along the way, as I taught myself how to draw properly rather than just mimic surface effects, I went back and the influences that I still use daily are guys like that are the original 1930s adventure strip artists. like Noel Sickles, Roy Crane, Frank Robbins, some Foster, some Raymond. I like Raymond's later stuff, like the 50s, more than the Flash Gordon stuff, even though the Flash Gordon stuff, you could see the raw imagination in that stuff. And then I also love the guys that generation influenced, like Wally Wood, Joe Kubert, Ditko. Kirby's always a huge one. And then I have a real love for the indie side of comics as well, where I love in my teens, when I was like thinking, oh man, I'm gonna get out of comics for kids. I started reading more indie comics, and I got into the Hernandez brothers, Dan Clowes, Charles Burns, and those guys kept me in comics. And then I saw David Mazzucchelli, who was like the biggest influence at that time, because I just couldn't understand how someone could draw like this, and like he could draw. I actually deliberately tried as a kid, like maybe I should just draw rougher, and, use a brush and not control it or something, and stupidly, but that led me to discovering like people like Toth and so forth, right? It's sort of, you like one thing, and then you figure out where they got it from, and then you figure out where they got it from until you get down to the bedrock, and eventually they led me to like Noel Sickles, so I like that kind of stuff, and I also like magazine illustration. I like Al Parker. I like who else do I like? Clement Call for pen and ink stuff. I pull from everything, anything that's visual. The only thing that I have that I can say is a commonality is that generally I tend to like people who strip things down rather than add more flourish. So that's the only thing that I can see as a commonality,
That's what you're looking for. That's the route you think that runs all the way through your what because I do think that there is something that is similar between Hopper, Fawcett, and Toth, because it has this very austere quality to it. And it's not about like Hopper's work is very psychological, but it's not made with pretty marks. So I just saw a show of his in Richmond last year, and he's one of my favorite artists. And when you look at his original, actually his watercolors are really nice. There's actually a subtlety in his watercolors.
I've never seen any watercolors from him. Wow.
That are actually in his pencil drawings, but his paintings are kind of rough, and the way that they're done, it's like if you look at a Sargent painting, it's like whoa, or Degas or Ang or somebody like that. There's just like amazing technique. But when you look at Hopper, you could go, okay, it's not the technique, it's this. Yeah.
Well, that's something that's definitely I can appreciate, because I would rather have more an emotional investment and an impact rather than just be doing it for technique's sake, right? I come from a background where my favorite kind of music, for example, was punk rock, and it was always about the energy, right? It wasn't about technique, and I kind of still keep some of that philosophy in my little snotty teenage self that I keep in the back of my head that says, if it has the energy, it's better than having like 10% more mistakes for 10% more energy is better than 10% better technique and losing that energy, And I find that some people, when they learn extreme amounts of technique, they find it very hard to scale that back, because they want to show who how good they are, and even if it's a disservice to the artwork itself, right? So I find a lot of people who really know how to noodle in drawings constantly noodle in drawings, because they that's who they are, and that's what fans are expecting, and that's what they built their name on, and then the actual intent of the piece is almost secondary. Whereas when I went to art college, one of the things that I like I took contemporary art, which meant like I did like, I started out doing non-representational painting, and then I went eventually to do sort of like installation type stuff and like large, canvases that were sort of quote unquote postmodernist, right? But so I didn't go to an art college like a lot of other people did, where they learned a lot of technique. I see friends in Toronto, for example. There's two art colleges: the Ontario College of Art and Design, and Sheridan. And Sheridan's where you go if you want to be an animator or an illustrator, and OCAD is where you go if you want to scream at a piano and and break pottery and put it on the floor and and do a sound poem about it, right? And I went to that school. But the one main thing that I learned that I still keep to this day is questioning about first principles. Like, what am I doing? What is the point of this? Not how do I make it pretty, but what am I trying to get across here? And how do I focus on that and strip out the extraneous stuff, right? Now, I say that, but I also know that as I'm in my 40s now, and as I age, one of the things that I've accepted and I've learned is that not to reject anything out of hand. Right. So when you're young, you go like, man, that kind of art is garbage. This kind of art is where it's at. Right. And then as I get older, I go, wait, I went down this one road for a very long time, disregarding this other road and thinking it was trash. Let's go back and reevaluate if there is something good down that path. So I find myself these days, like I spend a lot of my time being very reductive, and trying to strip stuff out of my work. And now I find myself reevaluating, well, is there another path? What's the benefit of people who do more elaborate rendering? Is there some emotional content that you can get from that? Mm-hmm. So I always tell my daughter, who is turning into quite a good artist herself at 11, don't reject anything out of hand. There's always something that can be learned, and figure out why they did it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you say that, because I went back to school in my mid 40s. I went back, actually went to finished arts college, went all the way through, got my MFA. So it's funny, the undergrad was about learning technique, and then the grad program was basically like, oh, you can draw, we'll never draw again, learn. Kept trying to turn me into they really wanted me to turn away from that, which of course I was not interested in doing that. But when I was in school, one of the things I had to say to myself was, you can take it in, you don't have to use it, you can reject it later. You don't have to use it, but you should open yourself up to it, to experience it, learn from it. But then you do, at a certain point with your own personality, this resonates, or this works for me, this doesn't, I'm not interested in that. Like, you can look at somebody's work and go, I can appreciate it even if I don't want to do it.
Right.
And I think
that critical facility is absolutely essential.
Yeah. And then I think as I get older, it's funny, I find I'm going back and being more attracted to things that I was attracted to earlier, that you sort of abandon. I think that's part of it is commercial art too, because commercial art, you're dealing with trends and what is popular, and what people want to hire. And I'm just old enough that we went from the Bronze Age to whatever the Tin Age, whatever the 90s was, right, where they were really sort of working and abandoning a lot of the traditional stuff and the stuff that I grew up with. And now that's all kind of coming back, because there was a while where like all that stuff was thrown under the bus, like any sort of traditional, your panels all had to have saw teeth, and and all that stuff was kind of, for about a good 10 years, there was a lot of stuff that was tossed aside. But like you said, now we've got people doing all kinds of different styles all at the same time. Yeah. And no one seems to be just like right out just rejecting something. Because there was a lot of stuff when I was at Marvel, even more than at DC. I think even at Marvel, there was more baby in the bathwater kind of thing. Like, one of the editors said that anybody who did stuff that looked like Al Williamson, everything looked like Jack Davis. All the EC guys were Jack Davis, right? So that Bernie Krigstein, that's Jack Davis.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So there was a certain prejudice against certain artists, which I don't think you would have as much now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because of the fact that I like I'm saying newspaper strip, right? Like adventure strip art, right? And actually, in my youth, I wanted to be an adventure strip artist. Some of you have been adventure strip artists, and I didn't realize, oh, okay, so you actually have no shot of being in a newspaper anymore in North America, right? You're going to be in like some periodical.
You only get it through death. That's how all of my, unfortunately, both of my strips came from somebody dying,
Right.
And somebody saying, oh, here's a guy who likes adventure strips or likes that stuff. I would recommend him. And then when Paul Ryan died doing The Phantom, I was already working for King. So it was like, and they have like, you got like 2 weeks, you got to find somebody.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It was like, if I keel over tonight, 2 weeks, there'll be another,
Right. Yeah, but now, like I'm saying, like I see so many people who have the same influence as I do, just even in my hometown, and here, like there are a lot of other artists, as many as that grew up idolizing Jim Lee. There is artists that I know who grew up idolizing Toth. They may have discovered him in their 20s, right, instead of in their formative 11, 12, 13-year-old years, because that's usually what happens. But I do find a lot of people I know who are my generation who appreciate the art from the 40s and the 50s rather than the art from the 90s, which seems a little strange.
There's a lot of guys your age that love Frank Robbins, and it's funny
Yeah,
because he was a guy that I always liked as a kid, because when I first started buying Marvels without the covers ripped off, he was the guy who was drawing Captain America. So
right.
I always liked his stuff. But there was a while there where it's like, if you compare him to like John Byrne or Neil Adams or other guys who were really, his stuff was so out of phase. And we even talked a little bit on the show that there's only a few guys like you and Chris Samney and a couple other people that you can see have that Toth influence, or the Kniff.
Yeah, okay, but here's the thing. I don't like Frank Robbins' Marvel work. What I really like is the Johnny Hazard stuff. And it's a sweet spot of like 45 to like 59, where it looks like he's drawing with a number 8 brush, and it's killer. His black spotting, his drapery, his storytelling is even great. Like I read all of those. Like I have full collections before they started putting them into hardcovers. I hunted down the little what is it, the Tony Raiola edition, and the Flying Buttress editions of Terry and the Pirates and stuff like that. I have 2 books of Scorchy Smith that are dog-eared and stuff like that. But and then they started putting them out at these deluxe editions, and I was like, oh crap! I just finished my collection of these. I finally, hit enough rummage sales to find the last 2 volumes. But the thing is that like the Robin stuff of the Marvel years was the stuff that I saw, and I was like, okay, this stuff doesn't hit me at all. I don't like this stuff at all. And then it was a friend of mine when I was in my 30s. I was friends with Darwin Cook, and I went to his studio for the first time just to meet him. And this is like when he was early on in his return to Toronto, just after he'd done Batman Ego, and we were introduced by mutual friends. And I went to the studio to meet him because we had I really liked his work. There were some similarities and stuff we both liked. And we were both talking about Noel Sickles, and he was showing me his collection of artwork from people that he admired, and he had a Kniff drawing of a giant Steve Canyon, and I was like, oh, it's a Chalk Talk piece, right? And he was like, oh, okay, you get this, you know what this is, right? And I was like, yeah, I love Kniff. And then he showed me, and he was like, he showed me a page, and I said, who's this? And he was like, it's Frank Robbins. And I was like, the Invaders guy? you know, and he was like, oh, no, you've got to check out this stuff. And he showed me the Johnny Hazard stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this stuff's gorgeous. You know, it's like, it was like, if you took Sickles and Kniff and then just cartooned it a little more, you know, and made it more lively and animated. And I was just completely blown away. So he was a big influence, you know, and a lot of that stuff was from me. Like when I was starting out, you know, my thing was I didn't want to learn from like the guy that I liked, you know, like if I liked, say, I don't know, Mazzucchelli, for example, right? I didn't want to learn from him. I wanted to learn from the guy that he liked, and then the guy that he liked until you got to that bedrock. Because then I figured I'm not learning from an 8th level of stylization. I'm not doing the 12th generation version of Neil Adams. You know, I'm trying to figure out, you know, how the first guy broke down perceived reality into black and white. You know, and then from there, I could, if I could see it from that bedrock, I could, you know, put my own spin on it and stylize as my, you know, my evolution as an artist added its own particular flavor. But I was not trying to eighth generation, you know, Neil Adams or Frank Robbins or something. You know, I wanted to be, or, you know, so I wanted to try and figure out where that was always my thinking, was I wanted to get right back to the roots. And the roots for that stuff was 30s adventure strip art, you know. So to this day, like I love Roy Crane and I love Noel Stickles. If you ask me who are my if you boil it all down, it would be like, for comic work, it would be like Roy Crane, Noel Stickles, and Jack Kirby, right? Because like, Kirby did all the superhero stuff. So that's
and then he did all that. And Kirby was a guy who had like really 3 separate stages of his career, because he had the 40s stuff.
Yeah.
Then he had the like sort of straight, what they called New York slick 50s stuff, which was the Challengers. And then he had the Marvel or the 60s on stuff, you know?
Yeah, but then he also had like 70s and 80s. Like I love every era of Kirby. Like some people don't like Captain Victory. I love Captain Victory, you know? Some people don't like Boys Ranch. I love Boys Ranch, you know?
I love Devil Dinosaur. He did some great stuff on Devil Dinosaur. I mean, to me, I think after Commandi, where his brain was obviously really running and having all these great concepts, he kind of did that a little bit with 2001 Devil Dinosaur. And you think, like, who could follow Stanley Kubrick? Kirby. Or Mobius.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and he did the Eternals too in that era.
Yeah. And it's funny, what you were saying is one of my principles as a teacher is I say that to the student, is you don't, and most of the young students I teach like anime. And so I was actually doing this the other day. I was dug out a bunch of, I showed it like a Tezuka drawing, and then I dug out some Hoppity Goes to Town and Gulliver Fleischer stuff, and some Boots, I think it was called Boots and Her Friends, this 30s Art Deco-y kind of stuff that those guys were looking at. So you go back and you look at, because the anime guys, that's what they were looking at. Right. They weren't looking at anime. They were looking at the American cartoonists.
Well, there was no anime.
Cartooning. Yeah.
He's looking at right. So
if you look at their, especially Tezuka, you can see Cats and Jammer Kids folded in there. You can see a lot of the early deco-y sort of cartoonists folded in there. That then keeps evolving over the years. You know, it's kind of hard to see it if you're looking at a Neon Genesis or some of those things, because they're kind of like their own thing after a while. But yeah, I think the same with Frazetta. If you look at Foster, you can understand Frazetta. Yeah, because you understand that concept of the high contrast, the thin contour, the high contrast black, which Sickles also used. Which gives you that sense of realism, and your figures have that weight.
Yeah, I used to always think that Sickles invented that chiaroscuro technique, that the Kniff style, right, in Scorchy Smith. And then I was like, I saw all the Hal Foster Tarzans, and I was like, oh, it's the same stuff. Yeah, so these guys both came independently to break down, you know, reality into black and white, and they both independently came up with the idea that this bold stuff would stand out rather than this outline and line based stuff. You know, the proper application of like black spotting and light would make it pop on the newspaper page, you know. And that Tarzan stuff, I mean, when you look at it, you sit there and you try to put yourself in that headspace, and you go like, this is a young man. This is not the older Foster that's going to Jerusalem and doing sketches of the Holy Land and things like that. This is a young man experimenting, you know. And I love that energy in that stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. So did Bob Kane.
Right? I used to tell my students that Foster was the Old Testament and Sickles was the New Testament.
Right.
Together, you got the Bible and you could go.
Yeah. I love Foster's work. I mean, and like, again, I discovered him through Wally Wood, you know, and I discovered Wally Wood through, I don't know, everybody did took something from Wally Wood at one point or another. Right. So, yeah, and like I have a large collection of Prince Valiants, but the later ones, I got to tell you, they're really glacial in pace, right? Whereas the early ones, you're going like, oh, they fight a giant crocodile, it's amazing, you know. Oh, he's holding out 50 guys on a bridge, you know. It's like, you know, and you could see the evolution of somebody.
Of course, if you think about it too, the character was aging, so as he aged, he didn't have as grand adventures as he did when he was young. When I can't really think of
Arn was having more of the adventures eventually. Son.
Yeah.
You know, Sickles was really interested in trying to translate the feeling from the black and white movies, and he was looking for a way to bring that to the page. And his the only Addison he ever mentioned was Harold von Schmidt did a series of black and white illustrations for Death Comes for the Archbishop and a couple of other Western books, which I found. And you can see, it's interesting to see how what von Schmidt was doing was translating his oil painting technique, but he could never use ink. He said he could never use ink. It was too slippery. He couldn't control it. So all of his black and white was gouache.
Oh.
Gouache, or tempera as they call it. And so because of the thickness of that paint, he ended up doing this kind of chunky stuff, trying to simulate his full rendering in oil. Then Sickles took that and cut out all the feathering and everything and turned it into this real powerful language.
Yeah. I love Sickles stuff. You know,
actually, you know what? I actually found that you're mentioning that. I found some here. If I share my screen. Let's see here.
Yeah, let me know.
I can go get the book in the time it's going to take you.
I got it.
Yeah, see?
Oh, yeah.
It also looks like Herbert Morton Stoops.
Yeah, he was very influenced by it too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
That's beautiful.
It's almost, there was a lot of guys that are very similar to that. Even Rockwell Kent.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of wood block, high chiaroscuro. I mean, the chiaroscuro is something that people have been using for a long time. But I think once it came into the sort of that pulp era of people doing stuff, it's funny. People can have similar ideas almost at the same time, I think, in illustration, especially back in the day, because it's like the environment almost was blowing up.
And the needs of the printing, right?
Yeah.
So, the limitations of the medium, and then how to get the most out of those limitations. So when you have black and white printing, and then the guys are bound to come up with the idea that, like, how do I make this stand out and be bold? You only have two colors, black and white. Why not put them at extreme contrast to one another?
Mm-hmm.
Just like when later on, we had an era where there was cheaper pulp magazines had a single color, black and a single color, right? And so you saw a lot of people develop an approach to that, and eventually some people they arrived at similar conclusions, whereas in this era we have, an infinite amount of options because printing can do anything. So and you can't print it, you can put it online and animate it, right?
I mean, you had guys develop the whole style doing 2-color, 3-color.
Right.
During the war, you couldn't always do 4-color. Paper rationing.
I used
Tony,
I used to work almost exclusively in black, white, and one color, and it was because I was influenced by like children's annuals from the 50s or British publications, and I would sit there and be like, why does this stuff look so good? And it was because and it was bold as hell because it was reductive. But also, when I started working on it, people would tell me like, don't you find it limiting? And I was like, no, I actually find it freeing because I don't have to juggle color relationships. I can just go for light effects. It's a tonal thing rather than trying to figure out whether purple for a sky works well with this guy's green pants. I was free to just think up lighting effects and therefore present more emotional content in the drawing, and then people would say like, well, yeah, but what if you have like someone's got white hair and they're wearing a white suit and they're against a white wall? And it was like, well, I like the technical challenge of figuring out a solution to that, casting a shadow or putting a cast shadow of a bar going across that they break or something, So I enjoyed all of that stuff when I was working in a much more limited palette. I still to this day like work in a very limited palette. I'm always trying to strip it down to as few colors as possible, and then occasionally I will like the little rebel kid in me goes, no way, man, I'm going to do something that's in full color now. I'm going to go render this thing out in as million colors, and just to get away from that, so from anybody's expectations of me.
Well, a lot of guys used to do that in the Reader's Digest.
I love that cover you did where it was I think a Spider-Man, but you did like a 70s book cover style.
Oh, yeah.
Just thinking of it purely as a design motif that's going to say something about the content. It's very clever.
Yeah,
I think I have that.
Bad Bob Peak, all that is like I'm sitting there going because they go, it's Spider-Man life story written by Chip Zdarsky, and I think Mark Bagley drew the interiors. I'm not sure on that, but they said, yeah, so we want you to do the second cover for the second issue. It's set in the 70s, and they said, so if you could make it look kind of 70s, and I said, oh, I can make it look kind of 70s. It's gonna have wood paneling, And so, like, I went all out. I'm not Bob Peak, don't get me wrong. I could never hit that level, But I was just like, how do I do a fake version of that would be good enough to at least convey the idea of the era,
And those guys also learned, I think, were experimenting a lot in those old Reader's Digests where they would do some grease pencil and then they would cut a lift, just like one color.
Yeah, I remember seeing a bunch of Austin Briggs drawings like that. And I was just like, yeah, the grease pencil stuff. I still work with grease pencil because of like that, and to do instead of doing like that one color as a tonal treatment to define values in like proper lighting, they would do it as a design element. Right, so they would just slash it to a direction that goes against the figure or that plays against the movement of the figure, And I would love that kind of stuff, I like
Even
that.
McGinnis did stuff like that. I found some McGinnis stuff that he did, and you think of the James Bond movie posters and stuff, but he was experimenting with that stuff in the 50s too.
Hey guys, I want to show Michael's Spider-Man illustration. Let me put that up real quick.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Now, I should point out I have an advantage in this because my wife is an award-winning designer and art director, and so when I laid this stuff out, I roughed out some very bad type, and I just said I want it to look like Soul Train, right? And she actually went and made this great typeface, modifying existing typeface. I said, that's it, exactly, And I had my rough was very bad, for the lettering, and we often collaborate like that. So I have an advantage over some in the design department because my wife Claudia Davila is a fantastic artist in her own right.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
So I want to answer a couple or put some questions from the chat up. But Michael, I was hoping before we got into that, you can tell us a little bit about how you got into the business, and also if you could talk about how the internet helped get you on your way professional, because that's how I found out about your work from your blog.
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, I came out of college and I was set to be a painter. and then I got tired of eating ramen, and not being able to sell these giant 6-foot canvases that I had in my studio, and I was tired of living without any hot water. So then one day somebody knocked on my door and said, "Hey, there's a theater company down the street that's looking for an illustrator. You're an illustrator, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I lied, but I knew how to paint in gouache.
As of today.
Right, exactly. So, but I had one advantage: I knew how to paint in gouache, and so I took some samples down to this place, and they hired me on the spot, and I did some theater illustrations. And prior to that, I had been doing a day job it was a night job where I was painting murals, because I was good as a painter in oils, but I painted large canvases, and I could do some photorealistic stuff. So the only job with those skills available for me at that time was to climb scaffolding at like midnight and then paint murals on the side of buildings for, movies that were coming up and things like that. So I would sleep all day, wake up at like 10, go to work at midnight, and then come back home at 8. And then when I did these illustrations for this theater company. I mean, they were terrible illustrations. It was, I was garbage, but they gave me some tickets to see the show. And then when I went to see the show, I saw that they had taken my drawings, these little gouache drawings that were about this big, and then converted them into giant sets, And somebody else had climbed the scaffolding and had painted all that stuff based on my drawings. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be climbing this crap anymore at midnight, and I'm not going to be sitting there trying to climb back down at 4 a.m. for a pee break, and working with spray guns. So I started focusing on trying to do illustration work for money. And I initially thought of it as my money-making job while I was a painter. I wanted to exhibit galleries and such. And then I realized that what it was at some point I had to make a decision. Right? It was, you can't go down both paths, because there's never enough time in the day, and you're always going to be split, and you're never going to be good at one of these things, because you'll always be mediocre. So I made the decision that I'm going to treat illustration as my art, and I was going to give it to it the same level of dedication and desire to be not just a hack or a cog, but to make art out of illustration. And so I decided to do that, gave up oil painting, and I started getting offers to do book illustrations. I would just support myself doing whatever. One of my earliest jobs was doing children's illustrations for magazines in Canada. There's a bunch of Canadian children's publications, and in those I worked from a very comic book style with black outlines and lots of brush inking, and that led me to do more magazine illustrations. And then I eventually left children's illustration and started doing more mainstream editorial assignments for like magazines like the New Yorker or the New York Times Book Review and things like that. And but living in Canada, and in Toronto particularly, we have a city that is lousy without cartoonists. I mean, you could throw a rock and hit 2 cartoonists, So all my friends that were artists were cartoonists. We had a little circle in town where we would all get together for lunch on Wednesday, and there was about at one point there were about 10 of us, and they were all like, "Dude, we all draw comics. Why don't you draw comics? You obviously know how to draw comics. You can draw comics." And and keep in mind, some of these guys work for Marvel, some of these guys work for made indie comics. Some of them made newspaper comics, some made children's comics, but they were all cartoonists. And, and so I started doing more comic stuff because that's what all my friends were doing. And then eventually that led to me doing some web comics with friends. When they started, these fellow professionals started doing a web comic project. And then that led to, back in the day, they would just put you on the bill at a convention and expect you to show up without telling you. And they would give you a table. So I would just sit there at a table and then finally I put out a graphic novel. And then after that, a lot of companies started contacting me going, "Hey, would you want to do some covers for us?" and so forth. And so that's sort of where I am now. But yeah, it is the internet. It's fascinating how that works, because I'm old enough to have been around for the dawn of the internet. I have my domain registered, MICHAELCHO.com, since 1996, and I did that back then. And I was shocked that someone had already taken Cho.com, because this was like the beginning of the internet. I was like, "What? How many other Chos use the internet?" And and so I used to make I used to work in sort of solitude, and then my wife made a no. It was my friend Jay Bone had a blog. He said you should make a blog. So I said, what's a blog? And so I made a blog.
Yeah, I remember going to your blog.
Right. Way back in the day when people actually used blogs. And then J-Bone was like, hey, there's a bulletin board that we all use called the drawing board. It was started by Shane Glines. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, that's cool. I'll check it out. And I was shocked at how great a community it was.
Yeah.
You know? Because you were on there, Mike, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I met so many people that today, like Francesco Francavilla, Daner, there's so mmany customers.
Sean Galloway. Yeah.
Sean Galloway was on there a lot, and then I'm trying to think of a couple. Oh, there was a guy, Jordan Gibson, who's very good. But when I saw his work on the drawing board, I was like, oh man, this guy's like kind of rough. He's not that great. He was 15, and so when I see to these days, he's always pointing, because he's a well-known cover artist and colorist, and he's like, yeah, I was 15, Mike. And I was like, yeah, I know, dude. I forgot. I just thought you were like, I was not that great,
Yeah, that was a really good spot, and we've talked about this before on the show, because you really had that mix that you don't really get now between pros and established pros, young pros, and people trying to get in.
Exactly.
All mixing.
Right.
And it wasn't without the toxicity.
Without, because when you're on social media now, you are like, one of the reasons forums like that died out is because everyone, instead of sharing their work with their peers in a closed forum, they decided to start sharing their work with everyone, including their peers, on social media. But the problem with that is then it's not a curated group of people who are like-minded. It is more, you get people go like, oh, cool, you drew Batman, now draw Superman for me. Rather than someone who can, a fellow artist who could sit there and go, hey, that's a great drawing, but you know what? If you correct the cape here, it flows better this way. You start comments like, you didn't draw sexy enough, or something stupid.
Yeah,
and so I miss the camaraderie of the drawing board. I was certainly incredibly influenced by the early connections I made there. I remember one of the first times I posted something there, Mike Waringo commented, and said, hey, your stuff's really good. And that meant the world to me, because he was a professional whose work I really admired. And just goes to show how, there's a million stories of Mike doing this with everybody. So it was to show what a nice guy he was, because, he went out his way to just throw a few words of encouragement to younger artists. And, that the impact that had on someone like myself and various other artists was huge,
Yeah, I think it would be hard to do that. There have been a couple attempts since then, but it always seems like they blow up.
Yeah.
Because you always get the people that are.
I think there's groups of like artists that congregate on Facebook and stuff like that. I these days I have so little time with kids and family to participate in things like that. But I do wish that something like that existed for younger artists. My daughter is 11 and she has a small little group of friends on Pinterest, for example. And they encourage each other, and I find that fascinating and a hopeful sign.
Yeah. I think also that we came to it, and I'm older than you, so we came to it after we sort of developed our social skills.
Right.
Not like you're developing your social skills and developing your social media skills at the same time, because I think that sometimes the younger artists will not be as polite as you would think that they could be in the beginning. Because I find most professional artists remember being right where the amateur was and wanting to get in.
Right.
And most people want to help, and most people are willing to help. But then sometimes younger people are a little bit too familiar or a little bit too rude or demanding, which is one of the reasons why I stopped participating on the drawing board, because the bigger it became, the character of the board started to change. And I remember I was helping people and giving people critiques, but it was almost like, well, then they didn't appreciate it anymore.
I saw that too, where you could, but like, I don't I don't necessarily blame younger artists, because I try to view it from the perspective of someone who is outside of the media, right? Like, for example, I mean, I criticize basketball players and I say that guy sucks, because I don't play basketball, professionally, right? You watch a movie and you go like, oh yeah, that actor, man, that guy's garbage, right? Because I don't act, right? But if I was an actor, I would know that calling somebody garbage is not something that you should be throwing around lightly. It's not a nice thing to say, but we are so used to doing that because we grow up saying that about various things. Oh, I used to watch the Thundercats, man, He-Man's where it's at. Thundercats is garbage, So it's like we use that language and we assume that these people the people who create these things are public people, and somehow, but they're not, they're human beings, and therefore they are the language that we use gets back to them, particularly in this era, and it's hurtful, and some people will say things like, like, oh, well, they're professionals, they're swimming in millions of dollars, they should be able to take this. And and it's like, it doesn't matter. Hurtful words are hurtful words, right? So
here, let me adjust that pile of $1,000 bills under my rear here.
Mm-hmm. Like, I always find it funny that like occasionally I'll run into somebody at a convention and they assume that because you worked for X company or whatever, that you must be swimming in money or something. And I ask them, what do you do? And they tell me, oh, I'm a fireman, I'm a lawyer, I'm a litigator, or I'm a teacher. And I go, man, these guys probably make more than I do. Just because you've drawn Spider-Man does not mean that you are a millionaire. Maybe if you played Spider-Man in a movie. So.
And in fact, that's really not. I mean, it's not really most people's goals who are artists who want to get into the business. I mean, you want to be able to make a living, but your goal is to be able to draw the cool stuff, the fun things that you want to do. Not like, my goal is to make $1 million. Then you would probably be trying to do something like Garfield.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You would be, because you're not going to make $1 million really drawing comic books for Marvel and DC, really. I mean, there might be a couple guys that have gotten that, but today you make that through all the merchandising,
Right.
If you want an airplane with a picture of your character on it, you've got to be doing stuff for MetLife, right? And Coca-Cola, and because you're not going to do it.
It's true, because most artists, like, I'm not. What I try to do as an illustrator is just try to ride that fine line of having fulfillment in drawing something I enjoy, and using my skills to still follow my or whatever artistic path I have, but also balancing with the reality of needing to feed my family and hit the mortgage payments,
which is always a tricky balancing act.
Absolutely. That is like, in an ideal world, I would be drawing exactly what I want to and not having to, sit there and go, well, I'll have to adjust that person shaking the hand of the boss for the bank illustration, because I can draw whatever the heck I want to, but the trick, the balancing act, is trying to get an assignment and understand from clients that they will give you the freedom for you to be yourself. And to hear that voice in your head that says you got to please the client, but while also ignoring that and saying, just make the best damn thing, and to ride that little knife edge is what, most illustrators do on a daily basis.
Which is the difference really between being the fine artist and the commercial artist, because the fine artist, you're just doing your own thing, sink or swim, you know what I mean? Except once they start selling it in the gallery, then the gallery goes, make some more, just like the last one.
Yeah.
Right.
I worked at an art gallery once, and it was a very high-end gallery, and it's what made me stop wanting to do fine arts, because I saw how the sausage is made, and it was enough to turn me off.
Yeah. That was the interesting thing about going back to art school. Probably also being older, because I'd already had a long career before I ever went to, and I started getting into galleries, and then you see that whole other basically commercial art, which is the galleries, because they're not putting it up for people's edification, they're putting it up because they can sell it. But while you're in school, they give you that whole other fine artist, hand nailed to the floor. Yeah, So you would get these really weird wind shears I would see with some of the, especially the younger students, because you're like, you're going to be pure, you're going to be a fine artist.
Yeah.
But then, my teacher just had a show and he sold enough money that he made $250,000 and he doesn't have to teach anymore and he doesn't have to. Well, wait a minute, I want some of that.
Yeah, I would find going to art college as a contemporary artist. One of the things that I found critical was the fact that I would see a lot of the theory and the concepts behind work as a critique of capitalism, right? Like you'd see Barbara Kruger's work that said, giant billboard that said, "I shop, therefore I am," as a critique of capitalism. But it was also sold at a gallery, for a lot of money. And they would take that same image and print giant, very expensive tote bags with it that were art items, And so it was like, well, in the economic structure that we live in, which is capitalism, then this idea of the purity of the artist can't really exist, because we are all interacting with, commerce at some point or another, whether we're aware of it or not. Even if you lived in the ivory tower and the systems that support the creation of your work, you are feeding or interacting with capitalism anyway.
Right.
So you might as well be honest about it.
Michael, I want to be conscious of your time. So I do have a couple questions, and I hit you up in a private chat. I don't know if you saw it. It's too late, Michael. We're gonna go. We're going in.
Okay.
So we have a question from Britt. Britt is a regular here at Pencil to Pencil, and Britt says, "Michael, can you talk a little bit about the influences behind Shoplifter and Karina's concept? What drew you to make a story about a woman like this? What challenges did you face in creating a woman with such authenticity?" Thanks, Britt. And I also have some images if you're okay with me sharing.
Sure.
Okay. All right. But feel free to start talking, and I'm going to get these up.
So, Shoplifter was a graphic novel that I put out, and it was like about 96 pages, and it was a short story about a woman who worked in advertising and her sort of disillusionment with working in advertising. And the reason I wrote it was because I would see a lot of people that I knew who were they were incredibly intelligent. They were sharp enough to critique everything around them with a very critical eye and with nuance. But for whatever reason, they were creatively blocked from actually creating something of their own. And so I wanted to write a story about that, about people that it was influenced by people I knew who could, analyze all kinds of media and tell you, why they liked Firefly, or why they thought that the poems of Emily Dickinson were not very good, or literature and such. But for whatever reason, they felt creatively blocked on their own thing. And most of the time it was a fear of failure, a fear that their extreme understanding and comprehension and critical facilities, whatever they produce, will not be able to hold up to that snuff, that standard that they had, right, of their so I wanted to write a story about that, and then couple that with the problem of trying to be a creative person in a commercial world. So she works in advertising, which was something that I always tried to avoid when I was younger, and yet I got sucked into myself because you had to pay the bills, right? So that was the impetus, and the challenge of trying to make something authentic that was feminine. I actually sidestepped that question altogether, because what I do is I did for this story, all I did was I wrote about me, but in order to hide me, I just changed gender. Right. So all I did was, in this case, was write as if I was in that situation, how I would have reacted at a certain time in my life, and then I just flipped the gender so that I wouldn't have to answer questions about is this a true story about you? Is this about you? And so forth. So I don't know if I was authentically writing with a female voice. I certainly wouldn't say that I did, but it was a voice that I could stand behind because it was mine, whatever like that's the only thing that I felt was important, was that whatever I put out there in this book, I had to be able to back it up, even if someone says, well, that's not real. I would say, well, it is real to me because that's exactly what I would have done. That's what I would have felt. You know? And that was the only defense I had against that kind of argument. I was pretty proud of that book. I certainly learned a lot from it. I never realized, I had never done a project that was like, 96 pages sounds like nothing to a lot of people who can do 200 pages in a year or something. But for me, when I started that, it was like, oh, I'm going into a tunnel and I can't see the light at the end of it. Really weird.
Yeah.
Did you write it all out? Did you write it? I mean, did you work in chunks?
No, I wrote the whole thing. I did the thing where when I wrote it, put on my writer's hat, and I did not think about whether or not it can't be drawn, or whether or not, because I didn't want to limit myself and start doing layouts and think of things. I was just like, I'm going to write this, and then the artist is going to put on the artist hat and go, oh Christ, you wrote a cat into the story. I have to learn how to draw a cat. You got a 6-page sequence here where nothing happens. How the heck do I draw that? So I cursed myself out a couple of times during the writing and drawing of that thing, and it was certainly an experience in learning how to do time management. Because boy, I learned real fast how many pages I could do in a day, and I had to make sure that I had to sit there and go, okay, this break is officially over because it's 15 minutes and 1 second. So
you did that. Did you have like a benchmark of how much you felt you had to do a day in order to make?
Yeah, I had a spreadsheet. That and keep in mind, I'm not a spreadsheet guy. You know what I'm saying? I'm an artist. I don't do numbers and columns and stuff. But I was like, okay, these dots represent, so it's 1.5 days to do this, 1.5 days to do this, right? That makes 3 days for a full finished page with lettering and scanned, right? I had little thumbnails of each of the pages that I printed out because I had thumbnailed the whole book and with the lettering in place. This is how stupid I am, right? Because so I could read it. Because when I read thumbnails with a script on another page, I don't know if it actually works because you want to read between the balloons and see if the image is on the right path. If the match stuff. Did they speak before they reacted? Did they react, before they spoke and stuff like that? So I lettered the whole thing and I drew a tiny little version of it, and then I took those thumbnails, scanned them, and printed them out about this big, and posted them all on a cork board, right?
Mm-hmm.
How I would reward myself, where every day as each page got finished, I would like tack a basketball card on top of it because I'm a big basketball nerd. And if I nailed the page, I would go, well, this one deserves Jordan, right? And then if this page is kind of garbage, so okay, this one gets the Mookie page. Okay, or I'm making fun of Mookie play like I should. But and if it was like, okay, this is good, but it's only a supporting page, okay, you get the Pippin, So
yeah,
my little reward to myself.
Yeah, I love how you create a reward system for yourself. Have you taken any of those kind of like deadline box checking practices into your other illustration work?
Or what do you mean? Like do I have a system?
Well, yeah, or kind of like, you have X amount of projects to get done by the end of the month. How you keep like I don't have a system for creating art, don't get me wrong, because I always find that's cookie cutter, right? Like, but what I do have is time management. Like I learned time management extremely, right? Like because we had kids and kids will teach you time management because you don't have 14 hours to F around all day. What I learned was that the first rule of time management for an artist for me was know yourself. Know thyself, meaning like know that you like to goof around on the internet. Know that you need to play video games. Know that if you say you're going to go to the studio and work for 5 hours, you're really going to goof around for 2. So plan for that. Figure out a way to make sure that you still get that stuff done. So go in 2 hours earlier or something. So along the way with that, also, I taught myself like things like every week, for example, I keep rigorous notes on what I'm doing, how many assignments I have going in a month, and then I only work on one creative task a day, and then a bunch of little administrative stuff like sending back an email or something, and then on the weekend I spend at least 1 hour
every weekend where I clear up all the loose ends. Right, so like all those the contract that had to be signed, if it came in, I just leave it in an inbox until the weekend, and then I handle all that stuff then and close out the week, right? And then I look at the calendar and my notes and figure out what I'm doing for that next week and plan it out as much as possible. Figure out from my notes, okay, so this guy said he was going to get back to me with approval for this sketch, and it's been a week and a half. I'm going to write an email to him now and send it on, because you don't send it an email at 11:45 on Saturday, because then they think you're an alcoholic, if you're a crazy person who's in their studio sending out an email at 4 a.m. in the morning, right? So I would do all that kind of stuff, right? Plan the whole week and have little rewards for myself. As I got older, I got and used the system more and more. I got rid of more of those rewards because they just became more ingrained. But I track all my hours, and I know exactly how long something took me, or so that I could write, so I could actually, without being a hack and just using a system to create art, I have a rough budget of how much time I know from experience. Like I review and I go, okay, covers usually take X amount of time, regardless of what kind of ideas you come up with and how you arrive at that idea.
Right. I like the idea that you're budgeting for administration days, right? Like, I just need a day where I can, send these W-9s out, or, or I got to sign these contracts. And I'm sure, like you, before COVID and everything, you had a pretty busy travel schedule. So there's also that, what I mean?
Yeah, you have to factor the flight times and stuff like that. But yeah, every weekend, without fail, I spend 1 hour just closing off all the loose ends from the last week, and then planning the next week. And the other thing I do that's really important is at the end of the night, I take everything that I'm working on that's on my drawing table, for the few times these days where I'm actually drawing something on paper, and put it away. So I'm not looking, so it's not on my brain. Right, because if it's on the drawing table and you walk into that studio, you think about it, right, and then you're running, and you're never really letting your brain rest. So at the end of the night, when I've finished everything, I turn off all, I close up Photoshop and all that. I turn off Sketchbook Pro, and I take everything off of my desk and put it into drawers, so that and I know what I'm going to do the next day.
Don't come to my studio.
I don't like being on 24 hours. Like if I'm in my studio and I'm watching something on the computer, I don't want to have to just look off to the side and see that drawing that is half finished and ruminate on. It's fun to do that sometimes, but it's also it allows my brain to rest if I'm not staring at it, and so that the next day when I look at it again, it's fresh.
Gotcha.
It's not just a continuation of ideas.
That's interesting. You're basically clearing your brain out in between all this stuff. That's smart.
But in order to do that, I had copious notes about where I am, what needs to be done, so that I'm not carrying a million other things in my brain, so that like I go like, oh, tomorrow I got to remember to ink this arm and patch this thing. And I remember I dropped a blotch of ink on this corner, so I got to remember to wipe that out before we scan it and stuff. I've written all that down so that when I put it away, and the next day when I take it out, I have all that stuff. So I have nothing in my brain in between that time to actually rest.
Right. That's interesting.
I remember when Brett and I used to share Williamson's studio, Al would come in and we'd have coffee and donuts, and he sort of like warmed up to working. Now, maybe it was different when he was younger, but he didn't come in and just like sit down and go.
Yeah.
But I would do that. I would just come sit down and pick it up and go. And he said I was the only guy he ever knew that did that. It would just come in, just get the thing, and just start drawing. So it's funny how everybody's brain has a way of.
Yeah, there's some people that do like long warm-ups, right? Like Gil Kane used to do that, right? Or Buscema would do that in between things. And I know, like when I was starting out at inking things, I would need like an hour to ink something, and like just random strokes or whatever, or until my shoulder warmed up and could handle that arc without And nowadays I'm just like, don't got the time, just hit it, dude. Start on some foliage or something, so that at least
you can hide that in the background.
Or the face,
Yeah, I mean, Al would do that. He would also ink like a bunch of pages at one time, and ink a little thing here and ink a little that, and then So that way he would go, like, if he was having an off moment, or if he wasn't quite warmed up, it was mixed in so it wouldn't look like this page is really good and like, whoa, wait a minute, what happened? You know?
Yeah, I've seen that people will do like one panel on one page, and then like 10 pages later they'll do another panel just as a warm up, and eventually the whole book comes together. And other people will start at like, well, I'll actually start the book inking it at like page 17 or page 5 or something, not the splash or something, right? And it's interesting, all those different approaches.
Yeah, because I heard that Kirby would just start at the top, and he would just go all the way through. And I know other people like would do a panel here and like, man.
Yeah.
And then they'll go off and they'll draw something else, and then they would come back. Because Al was kind of like that, at least at that stage. After he got off the strips, it was much more difficult for him to draw. So, not for ink. I mean, the guy could ink 5 pages a day some days. I mean, he was just amazing when he just had that flow. But with drawing, he would do sketches, and the sketches would be really good, but then he would like feel insecure about the sketch, and they're like, take a photograph, and he had this very elaborate, and some guys do, they have a very elaborate way of.
I'm enough of an Al Williamson fan that I could spot when he plays Han Solo in his reference photos, and when he's the guard at the palace, and I'm sitting, oh, look, there's Al Williamson dressed as the guard. Oh, here he is as Han Solo this time around, right? This is the one that he didn't have the photo from. These are the shots that he took himself, And it's kind of interesting because
he had stacks and stacks and stacks of photos.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny is because when you see it, like you see him age a little bit throughout. So it's almost like watching an actor, in a different film 10 years down the road. Like it's him in Star Wars versus him at the beginning of Secret Agent. And I'm just in Secret Agent Corrigan. I find it comforting when I see Al Williamson. I could spot the reference photo he took.
And he had photos that went way back into the 60s.
Yeah.
In his studio. And he had
he had photos going back to the 50s from the EC stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That he took. They were like real small little Polaroids that they used to take in the beginning. He would get a room that he built for his projector that was behind him.
Right.
So he could put stuff in there. And a lot of those guys. I mean, I'm sure Drake and all those guys did. They had tons and tons and tons of photos that they took over the years to get that casual spontaneity and to get the reference, to get the folds, the drapery.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that's accepted practice. Nowadays, I mean, you talk to some cartoonists and they think that using any kind of reference is somehow like taboo, like as if everything is supposed to come right out of your head. And I'm just, there's a right way to use reference and there's a wrong way to use reference, guys. Every illustrator that you admired used reference at one point or another. No, I've literally seen some people say things like, like if you can't make it out of your head, man, you're not a cartoonist. And I'm like, you can't make every single thing out of your head, guys. Otherwise you'll actually a lot of garbage come out of your head. You can draw that tank and it'll look like garbage, okay? Unless you're curved.
Yeah, I don't know when that started specifically, but I do know that there was a thing probably sometime in the 70s when Frazetta blew up, where it was like he never used swipe, he never used photo reference, which he obviously did because you can always tell when he did. But then it was like I never made that stuff up, and then I don't know if that was the origin of like don't look at my secrets, or you can't see my secrets, or
Partially because the older illustrators went to an art college where they learned proper technique, and then the younger guys, some of them learned just from other cartoonists. Right, because there wasn't a proper school, right? So a certain generation, like the first generations of cartoonists, a lot of them went to an illustration type of program, whereas a later generation just learned comics, And in comics, you do make a lot of stuff out of your head, right? But they were never exposed to, like 50s illustrators. They don't know who Al Parker is, right? So, so they were only exposed to other cartoonists, and they assumed that all cartoonists just made it up. Right, and it's like actually not all the time, dude. If you want to learn something, you actually have to look at real reference. You may make it up later, the second time around, but the first time you may have to actually look at how light falls at a face.
Yeah, I think there's actually there was I don't know if it's still going. There was at least one Facebook group for just swipes, like aha, you swiped this, so they would have swipes that other artists swiped, or photographs that people swiped. In fact, the other day, I'm in a Frazetta Williamson group, and the guy posted the pictures from that old 50s pinup magazine that Frazetta swiped for those black and white illustrations that he did of the girls in the bathtubs and stuff.
I think that's some of the problem is that, like, there's a difference between like swiping a photo, like tracing a photograph, right, and like literally swiping that thing. And then there's a difference between, like, say, merging a variety of references, like a car from here, a person from here, but changing the clothes, then adding your own lighting, and then changing the angles on that. And then there's another thing where you shoot your own photographs. You bring in models to or whatnot, and then you work from that. Some of those are completely acceptable practices. One of those is not. Like if you are literally taking a magazine cover that exists on the stands with a photo from like a Cosmopolitan or something like that, and then turning that into your artwork, that's tracing. That's wrong, right? But you shooting your own photos, you working from like looking at a model of a car so you could draw the other side of it, so that you could see the front grille, so that you could draw this car at a different angle. That's reference, And like Guinness would shoot photos, and he would trace them literally onto his board, right? And he would project them and stuff. That's an illustrator just working with the tools that he has, that he's supposed to do. He shot his own photos, I mean, you wouldn't have anywhere near the quality then. Anyway.
So, Michael, I want to get to, you were nice enough to share with us some process images. So I have this really sexy X-Men illustration you did. Whoa. And I want to share it on the screen and hope that you could maybe go through your process.
Sure.
Okay, cool. All right.
So that's the final art. This was a print from Mondo that dropped on the weekend, and apparently sold out very quickly. And I'm sorry to everybody who contacted me saying that they weren't able to buy it, and that bots bought it on and put it up on eBay or something like that. I have no control over any of this stuff. All I know that it was sold. It's my first project for Mondo, and it sold out very quickly. So that's the final art, and it's obviously the classic X-Men. The brief that they gave me was, we'd like you to draw X-Men, classic X-Men, and that was what the final art is. If you go to the black piece, God, I'm pointing at my screen.
No, I get it. You're good.
My original drawing that I did for them, and I came up with this concept.
Sorry
about
that.
That one, right?
Yeah.
And I did it, and it was approved. And the red dots in the background are supposed to be the eyes of the Sentinels. I thought it was okay, but it didn't have that oomph. It was good, but I was like, but they approved it, and I was about to do it, and then I was like, you know what? Let me come up with a better idea. So I came up with the one that's yellow there. And I did a rough sketch, and this one was done digitally. I sat there quickly and worked out this thing because I thought, I'll do this thing that looks like a Big Little Books cover or something, that sort of feel, right? And the idea would be the only idea I had in my head was, the X-Men go round in a circle, and the lettering is in the center, right, rather than placed on top. And as you go around from the edges inward, the figures get smaller and smaller. It's like a spiral until you hit Professor X, right? And I thought it'd be fun to balance it against the yellow background and have that merge with the jerseys. And then when I drew that, I swiped out the yellow background, put in the red, and I realized it worked way better. And so I went with that, handed this in, and they approved it. And then I drew the pencil sketch, where all I did was change it with the Artie Simic X. And I said, that would be great, right? And then they said, you have to put the Marvel logo in. And so I figured, well, instead of hiding in a corner, why don't we just make it prominent and make it part of the design? And that's how we arrived at the final.
Can you talk a little bit about your digital process? Is there any paper part of this, or is it all
I used to do everything completely on paper, right?
Okay.
I'm old enough to have done that mostly in my life, but the thing is, the last 5 or 6, 7 years or so, digital went from like 10% of my process to 20 to 30 to now in a rush, and I'm like, okay, I'll just do the whole thing digitally. I used to paint stuff like I would have done this in gouache 10 years ago. Nowadays, I do it in digital. So there is no pencil drawing on paper for this project at all. I drew all the sketches in Sketchbook Pro, which is an app that I use that very few people seem to use, but I use it because my requirements are I have to learn it in 5 minutes. I do not want to learn keystrokes. And with Sketchbook Pro, you get like one keystroke, the space bar that does everything. I think, Brett, you use Sketchbook Pro, do you not? I think I saw that in a
yeah, it's my favorite. I love it. I do all my coloring in it.
I make custom brushes. I've made custom brushes with their custom little icons that, that I put in my toolbar so that I have like a grease pencil brush, that I made with a little picture of a grease pencil and stuff. And so I drew this in Sketchbook Pro as a pencil. I drew each figure separately on its own layer so that I could size them and move them around as needed. And that's how I made this pencil art. You could see the underdrawing of a red there. That's the rough, because I tend to draw the drawings in red or blue, these days more in red. And then from there, I build the drawing after it's approved. I build the drawing layer by layer in color. So I one color on one layer, right? So it's not, the layers aren't decided by figure, like say foreground layer, background fit layer, or whatnot, but it's like red layer, blue layer, yellow layer, right? And that way, after I've drawn it all and have put it together, I can isolate each layer in Photoshop and go, you know what, I want that blue to be a purple, right? Or if that blue was, say, green, and then how would that balance against the red? And so it allows me to play with the values a lot more. And
are you picking PMS colors?
What's that?
Are you picking PMS colors?
No. I'm purely working in CMYK or RGB, most of the time in CMYK because it's for print. If you ask me to go to Pantone colors, like I could talk about colors in like paint tubes, like alizarin crimson, or like rose madder or something, and I could talk about it in like well, it's 25% black, it's 4% cyan. But if you ask me to do like the Pantone colors, forget it. My brain shuts down after 2 different iterations of color.
Michael, if you'll indulge us, I have a couple other things on the slideshow. I'll just kind of go through them real quick. Is that all right?
Sure.
All right, and then we'll get you out of here. So if you just want to maybe just touch on the illustration and what it was for, and maybe any interesting notes about it.
This is an illustration for the Terrifics, and I mentioned earlier how every once in a while I like to rebel against what I think my normal direction is and go in the opposite way. So this is my attempt at making an Al Williamson, Flash Gordon illustration. That one that we did for the Illustration Society where Flash is on the rocks, he's got the sword and there's a moon behind him.
Right.
And it's most beautiful illustrations of all time. Like, I'm in my 40s now. There's very little illustration art that gives me a sense of wonder anymore, that you had as a kid. That piece still makes me look up at it like I'm looking at a night sky, and it has that feeling of wonder. So I was trying to make something that was an homage to that, because the Terrifics are a super team that are described as explorers, and they said, it's something about exploration. So I said, okay, I'll put them on a different world, and then I stupidly drew this plastic man as the alien xenomorph, and when DC said, whoa, we didn't realize you drew him as an alien in color. Okay, you're going to have to do something that, or else legal might get mad, right? So I said, well, how about if I put some antennas on him? And they said, okay. So I matched and did that, but it was my attempt to try and do something that looks like, a lot of different colors, a lot of smooth rendering rather than the usual chunky stuff I do.
Very cool.
This is a variant cover for Marvel for Black Panther. I always wanted to work on Black Panther because I love Jack Kirby's Black Panther. But when I did it, I was like, I got no ideas. And I was like, all I could think of was like African textiles, right? So I tried to bring in some African motifs. I rendered Storm and Claw in a manner that I saw that, from researching African art, and try to put it on in that way and use sort of a book design sensibility as opposed to a comic book sensibility on this cover. So hence why the title is across the middle instead of at the top or the bottom.
All right, cool. I'm going to throw one more up here, and then we'll get you out of here. How about this one?
That is another variant cover, because a lot of these are variant covers, and this is for Captain Marvel / Shazam. I have no care for what the people call him. He's Captain Marvel or Shazam. All I know is when I was a kid and I was 7, the visual of Captain Marvel was dope as hell, right?
Yeah.
It's got a lightning bolt. He's red and yellow, and he's as strong as Superman. That's the most amazing superhero ever. So I connect with him, and I love CC Beck. Right, CC Beck has that Roy Crane in him, like the way John Severin has that Roy Crane in him. So I really love his work. And when they asked me to do this variant cover, the art director, who was Mark Chiarello, who is one of the best art directors ever, right? Like Chiarello was just incredible, right? An art director who can draw is one thing, but an art director who draws better than you is like a unicorn. He asked me to do this, and he gave me the worst advice. He said, we need a Shazam cover. It's got to be like kid friendly, innocent, playful, but badass. And I was like, innocent, playful, badass. It was like, like he's getting an ice cream. So I drew him having an ice cream, and they were like, it's more playful. Oh, maybe he could be playing with his listening to music on Spotify or something on his phone. And I was like, so I drew that, and he was like, it's a little too playful. So I finally just said to Marcus, like, look, let me just throw out the innocent stuff. Let's just draw badass, right? I'll come up with something. And I drew him. And initially, this figure was in a different composition. And then I played around for half an hour, like I do sometimes after I finish an illustration rough. I will just tweak it and play with it and move it around until with a different cropping. And I came up with this cropping, and I thought this works. And the only thing that's otherwise notable about this is that I can't draw Captain Marvel unless I draw him kind of CC Beck style. Yeah. So this is my attempt at trying to throw in some CC Beck flavor into the way he's drawn.
Very cool. All right, cool. Well, there's more, but Michael has to cut bait. So I wanted to show a little bit of his work before he had to hit the escape hatch on us.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do have to go. But you know what? I could talk shop all day.
We'll have to have you back. Well, maybe we should have a podcast where we have a big shop talk. We'll get 10 people in here talking about pinpoints.
I love it.
It reminds me of days because, like, back in, we're all my friends as we get older. We're all at home with kids, and we get together so rarely now. But in our 20s and 30s, you would get together, fellow artists, thinking that you're going to conquer the world, and you would just sit at a cafe or a bar for hours, just talking about, Wally Wood used to like burn the edges of his brushes with a mallet. And he would, and you would sit there and go, really? Wow, you know what? This company makes a really dope like sable brush that's way better than Series 7s, and it's way cheaper. They're called L's. You should try them. And you could spend hours doing that, and I love that stuff. But now, we're all at home and we just talk to each other on Twitter.
It's not the same.
Outrage.
So, Michael, can you tell our listeners and viewers where they can find more of your work on the internet?
On the internet, you can find me on Instagram. If you just search up Michael Cho or Michael Cho Art, you will eventually arrive at somebody that has pictures that look like mine, and therefore you'll know it's me. Other than that, you can find me on Twitter, but I don't recommend you find me on Twitter because I do not want to feed any more people into the hate machine that is Twitter. It seems to be a place where the negatives seem to outweigh the positives. When I've been on Twitter for a long time. For a long time, it was the only social media platform I used, and it was because most other artists I knew who were freelancers were up at night at 4 a.m. And when I was up at 4 a.m., I like to be able to chat with some friend of mine who was in Texas, also hitting the deadline at 4 a.m. That's what Twitter existed for. And for the first few years, it was great because occasionally somebody would, I didn't know, some fan or some fellow on Twitter would say something, and we would just get into conversations. But now more and more people just fling poop at each other on Twitter. And, every time I log on to Twitter, I find myself going, why did I log on to Twitter? Sometimes I find that the drama that is on Twitter only exists on Twitter. It doesn't exist anywhere else, and yet everybody treats it as if it's reality.
Yeah,
so
it's very true.
So I don't recommend anybody finds me on Twitter, but if you do, I post artwork there. I engage very little these days on that, and I'm much better off on Instagram or something where a lot of that negativity is gone.
Yeah, you have to protect your own sanity. That's really important.
I don't have the time. Nobody has the time. I mean, you're sitting there having a nice day with your kids, and then so your phone is blowing up. You're like, what is this?
What is this? Right.
I'm supposed to try and spend some time things with my son. I don't need to know this comics nonsense, that's going on, or whatever outrage people have got about something else. I'm sure it's legit outrage, but time and place, guys.
I love it. Well, Michael, we're going to let you get back to your family. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everybody listening and watching in the chat room loves you. This was a great episode. Hopefully we can have you back soon.
Well, you know what? It was my pleasure. As I told you guys before we went on, I've been Mike wasn't there, but I've been admiring and following your work for way too long. So it was a pleasure that you guys let me come on here and run my mouth endlessly while you just nodded and accepted the fact that this guy was running his mouth.
Well, it's what we do.
Really, really nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Likewise. I hope you guys stay safe wherever you are, and all the best to the future episodes.
Thank you so much, man. All right. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Nope. We're still on.
Yeah. I just kicked him out. That's That's my favorite part. Is I hit the torpedo. Button.
You should just have a chat where you invite people on just to kick them out.
We could call it the kick out podcast.
Right. Hi, Jamar. Hey.
We'll call it the eject button with Jamar Nicholas.
That's right.
So we have a little bit more time, guys. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Michael was a very great and gracious host. He's a fantastic illustrator, and we got a couple of really good questions. But we try to keep the podcast going to around hour 52 to 2 hours. So if anybody has any other questions for us, we'd love to answer them. Oh, look at that. Chris Bailey says, just beat me to it, the ejector seat.
There you go.
Hey, Mike. Tim Fielder says, Mike, would you be open to answering a few questions about how you do the Phantom?
Sure.
What
are those questions?
I'm curious as well. So as Tim loads his pistol up, I'm going to go through the chat again. And one of the things that really struck me about Michael's art when I first saw him, like apparently he had been around for a long time before I discovered him, was just his kind of like his really limited palette and how crisp and stark the colors he did use were. It really had a lot of callbacks, but it also had a really fresh, modern sensibility to it. So I know there are fans of his who just kind of connect to it because it doesn't look like everything else that's out there. And I wonder, maybe for you guys real quick, while Tim's getting his questions together, how do you feel about kind of like illustrative styles that kind of harken to the past, but kind of freshen it up for a new audience?
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I love all the old stuff, but I think what happens is that there's often in the past, because of their limited technical, the stuff that was limited in terms of no computers, they had so much more limited techniques available to them. They tended to focus more on getting to the heart of the matter, because nowadays there's so many bells and whistles on all these programs that you can just over render everything endlessly and then do it again or do it in a different color. But back then, because everything had to be done physically, they tended to hone in more on the essence of whatever it was they were trying to communicate. So I think there's a strength there that it doesn't get old if it's well done. So, as generations go by and, people, as Mike was describing, he's trace it back to its source. When you get back to the source, it's so fresh. Like the first work that Sickles did when he really began to use the black patterns and all that in the Scorchy Smith, is so electric still, just the visual, that you're seeing it in its purest form, because often these guys were discovering it. So they're as excited to see it happen as a viewer. And, in every new medium, you almost always see that this amazing stuff happens within the first 10 years or so, because it's opened up and everybody's experimenting and trying to find out what will work. As he mentioned, with new printing technology allows you to do new things.
Mm-hmm.
I think about, Howard Pyle, who's considered the father of American illustration, was there for his early work was then transcribed by engravers to be printed. So you never actually saw his actual artwork. It was reinterpreted. He painted on a wood block, and an engraver translated that carving right on the block, so his artwork was actually lost into a printing plate.
Mm-hmm.
And then make a metal plate from that. And but then the halftone printing came in, and he was able to transform from that, working for that medium, to be reinterpreted by an engraver into having his actual brush strokes and tones reproduced. So, he was right at the beginning of that, and he was also brilliant. So you just see this explosion of ideas that then influence everything that comes after.
Right.
Yeah, I think what you see when you see people hearkening back to this stuff is you're just mining this strength that never goes away. And then you can just by reinterpreting it in the time that you're living in and using modern tools to simulate some of those techniques, that can give it a modern feeling energy too.
Mm-hmm.
Like even one of the things that's very different now compared to guys doing stuff in the 50s and the 40s and back is the printing technology today is so far superior than anything those guys, even the slickest, best magazines. If you see the original painting and then you see how it was reproduced, there's just so much that was off. Even, if you're looking at a Norman Rockwell painting for the Saturday Evening Post, and then you actually see the original painting, there's so much more subtlety, so much more color and variety. Mm-hmm. When you see the work now, we live in a great time because I just got the book last week on Meet Schaefer. And when you see the reproduction of the actual paintings compared to what I remember seeing when I would see the covers that he did for the Post, there's so much more in the painting. So just your ability to use color, you have, they couldn't tweak the stuff that much now. Now you can go in and endlessly play around in Photoshop, right? And okay, I'm going to do this kind of stuff, this kind of color, for this kind of paper, with this kind of surface, this kind of finish. It would have been, I'm sure the guys like Austin Briggs and people that were doing stuff in the 50s, where they were doing overlays and cutting ruby lith and doing a lot of different things, would have died to probably do something in Photoshop, because you're still getting you're dealing with color in a very different way. Conversely, you can tell a person when they did stuff by how subtle color is. And I think in the old days, people understood how to use color better sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
They were not influenced by TV. They're not influenced by the internet. And so, their ability to capture color and mood, you had to understand color better.
Right.
In order to build it,
Mm-hmm. All right, Mike, I want to get to these questions. Tim has 4 live rounds in his gun.
Let me put my Kevlar on.
That's right. We are in Philly. Gotta be prepared. So his first question, these are all Phantom related. Tim says, how far ahead do you work on your installments?
Typically 4 to 8 weeks. 8 weeks is ideal. 4 is that's the minimum. And I'm right now I'm sort of running right down to the 4 week. So ideally, according to the old world schedule, you would have the story that's appearing now, and then another whole story done, or almost completely done. And most stories ran roughly 13 weeks. Supposedly Frank Robbins was one of those guys who was such a speed demon. He would have like a year's worth of stuff ahead of time, and he would just send, yeah, here, take a big chunk. He was really, really far ahead. Guys like Gary Trudeau, because of the political nature of his strip, would run as close to print date as possible.
Right. So, and just for people who may not be aware, Mike, when you're talking about weeklies, you're talking about 6 strips in a Sunday, right? So it's
6 strips, so 6 daily strips for the Phantom. I don't do.
You don't do the Sunday, right?
Jeff Weigel does it, but I do all 7 on Judge Parker. Okay. And Judge Parker, the Sunday strips have to be done even further ahead because they are printed with all the inserts that go inside the newspaper. So your J.C. Penney's and your tire ads and all that stuff that's in that big middle section, parade or whatever they call it. All that stuff's printed at one time. So they try to print the comics for every city, every region. There's a lot of different printers.
Right.
Some of them even use the old. They're still using those old
the cranks.
4-color. Some places are using high-speed offsets. So if I'm late, I get penalized every day that I'm off deadline.
All right. So next from Tim, do you feel that there is a venue for daily strips, perhaps webcomics, etc.?
No. I don't think people who read webcomics care about adventure comics, not the traditional adventure comics. I think that they tend to like to have, like the webtoon stuff, they like to binge like enough stuff that would almost be like a comic book, except it's the strips. And I don't think that audience cares about, some pulp. They don't care about Marvel or DC or pulp. I think if it's adventure, in my experience, the adventure is much more fantasy based, and it's a part of the story. And most of the stuff that seems to be successful is a lot of romance. A lot of romance, which is funny because Jack Kirby and Joe Simon created romance comics in the 50s, and girls like romance, females like relationships much more than male readers. With male readers will take it, but they prefer to have, So yeah, I don't think so. I think you could do a adventure comic, but I don't know whether it would appeal to. It's funny. The people that read the comic strips tend to be older than me. They're much older than I am, most of them, and they tend to remember things from when they were 12 years old as being that's the magical age.
Yeah, that's the magic number. Yeah.
Right. So if the Phantom looks like the Phantom they read when they were 12, perfect. But I don't think modern readers. In fact, an interesting thing, and I've talked with the other strip people that do the continuity. I think the major issue for us, a comic strip, you get one little thing a day, right? It's kind of like drip. It's like a drippy faucet. You get one thing every day. Modern readers are so used to things being fast-paced, it's too slow. They want to get the whole thing in one time. So the idea that 1 week may only advance the plot a little bit, some of them get too frustrated with it. Like, come on, let's, hurry up. Let's get to the gun,
Right. Okay. That was a good answer, Mike. Brett, how you feeling? You stretching it out over there?
Yeah. Well, I get up before 6 every morning, and then so.
Oh, plus you've been lifting. I forgot you talked about
lifting. I've been lifting.
I actually, if I share my screen, I will show you guys. So this is this week's strip I just turned in. So you can see you're getting a preview of what's coming.
Oh, you saw it here first.
Right. So here's the Monday strip, right? And so if you read through, standing by the car. So, and Tony's great with not giving me a lot of dialogue, right? And so here is that strip. Here's the pencils for that strip, right? They're talking about the car. And what I do is I actually write the dialogue in so I can make sure it fits. And then I pencil it out. And then I scan it in, send the page to Liang, who's my assistant who inks the backgrounds. And then she inks the backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I ink the figures.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I will ink the background if it's a background I feel particularly is important or something I want to do myself. So that's how we're working now. I would prefer to do it traditionally, but since the pandemic, Liang's working off-site. She's working at home.
Yeah.
Right. So here's another one, so you can see. So, and then here, to save a little time, I found a picture of that car, the BMW convertible. So I didn't want to draw the whole car, but they're walking back to the car. So I found a photograph at the right angle. I think I just distorted it a little bit, so that then Liang inked that.
Nice. Yeah.
Right? And then I inked the figures.
Liang's getting really good, Mike.
She's getting good. Right.
Kevin asked, "What size paper is that?" I'm assuming you're talking about the live art area in this file.
Yeah, it's 2 up on 14 by 17, 3-ply Strathmore.
Mm-hmm.
300 series.
So, because Mike is still penciling this stuff by hand and then scanning it in,
right,
for inks.
Right. So there, and then here's the inks on that one.
Mm-hmm. An ill wind.
Right. Now there was a fair amount of dialogue in this week because we're sort of connecting how Imara disappeared at the end of the last story, so yeah. But then he'll give me plenty of room. He still tries to give me room. He writes. I've been working on the strip 4 years now. So he writes towards my strength, which I think he wrote towards Paul Ryan's strength, but now that he knows me, he writes towards my strength. So, I try to ink digitally just like I would do traditionally. It's not exactly the same, but I can get it close enough. And then once it's reduced, so like in this one, I could not find exactly the angle that I wanted, so I had to draw it by hand.
Gotcha.
And so here I'm thinking the whole time, like a lot of this is going to be all covered up with word balloons. So
right. So it's always important that you have open space to fit the dialogue.
Yeah, that's one of the things that people have to sort of learn to do, because when you start drawing, you're not drawing and writing. And most people don't start drawing and writing their own stories. They sort of start drawing a story and then, and then show the samples. And there's always that thing, like in the beginning, especially if you work from a plot, they'll say, I have a full script, right? So if I have a full script, I know exactly how much room the words are going to take.
Yeah.
If I get a plot, it might just say the Phantom and Amara stand by the car, and then, Amara looks away, and when she looks back, the Phantom is gone. There is no dialogue, right? Then it would be up to me to decide, well, how much room do I want to leave for the dialogue? I know how much room to leave because it's a full script. If it's a plot, he would then dialogue it after reacting to what I drew. So with the strips, you can't work that way. So that is a sort of a transition that some artists have to go through. if they're used to working from a plot, or not used to working with working with a script. They don't know how much room to leave. I was always told in the beginning that it was good to leave at least a third of any balloon, 1/3 of any panel, free to be able to put a balloon. So if you drew a balloon, right? If I just drew a balloon, I could figure, okay, I know that I could fit it in.
So, Mike, while you're, okay. So I want to try to burn through Tim's other questions. The number three is an easy answer. Tim says, I'm not able to see the Phantom because it's not carried in Atlanta area papers, as far as I know. Is there an online space for it?
Yeah, it's Comics Kingdom. That's the King Features website. And then if you just type in, I think the Seattle paper carries it. There's a lot of, but Comics Kingdom is the daily portal that you can see all their stuff. And
it's all archived, so you can read like years and years and years and years.
You have to pay to read years.
Oh, really? So there's like a cutoff, like after,
yeah,
like you can only
read a week at a time.
Huh? I didn't know that.
Yeah, because then they have archived, like they have the old Johnny Hazard strips. They have the old Apartment 3G. They got the old Stan Drake stuff. They got a lot of older Popeye stuff. They got a lot of the old classic strips. But in order to see them, you have to be willing to pay, I don't know, $11 a month or some. It's a pretty small fee. But
it's free to ask asinine, put asinine comments in the comment section.
Oh, yes.
That's free. Okay. Snark is free. Okay.
Snark is free, like with the rest of the internet. Yeah.
All right. So number 4, and Brett, I'd like to see if you can weigh in on this one also. While I was a huge fan of Lee Falk, my personal favorite Phantom artist was Don Newton, specifically with the beautiful line work and painted covers. Your thoughts?
I think somewhere in the attic I might have some of those Don Newton comics. I think I bought them years ago. And I'd always heard that they were supposed to be pretty cool. I vaguely remember his covers. And he was a good artist. I remember he used to draw Batman. And then he died from drinking some spoiled milk or something like that.
Really?
Yeah, he was like a health nut, and then I think he drank something that didn't agree with him or something. I mean, you can Wikipedia it. I'm sure they will say cause of death.
Spurled milk.
He did die young, but I remember those, seeing those as a kid, and I liked them. But I mainly remember him from Batman too. Yeah, it's too bad he was cut short, because he was a good storyteller as well.
So, Mike, anything else about the process of doing? As one of the things that I've always been envious, or probably a little surprised that you do at such a long clip, is just to juggle these 2 daily strips, and you've just kind of made that's your bread. That's not your bread and butter, but that's just your thing now. If you're not doing one, you're doing the other. You're doing both.
Well, it is my bread and butter too. I mean, that's how I get my bread and my butter.
Well, you know what I'm saying. So it's like, is there any? Has there ever been a point where not to say you've gotten things confused, but how do you, just like talk about Michael Cho's process of keeping everything together? How do you keep all that stuff in line? Like, how do you, keep all these files together? You have all your notes for each week.
Yeah, it's a lot of files, or a lot of reference. I basically look at it as sort of like, it's like playing 2 different roles on 2 different TV shows. It's like, being on Hogan's Heroes or Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Well, you're showing your age, Mike.
I guess it would be like being on Game of Thrones.
There you go.
And, being on, I don't know, X-Files or something. There's like a different vibe to each strip. One is a soap opera strip. Right. And so it's like the old classic soap opera strips, right? So it's more about like real people doing faux real things. And so it's a lot of pedestrian, like people sitting on chairs and sitting in kitchens, and where the Phantom, I get to draw a foggy background, and a lot more exciting mystery type of stuff. So I think of one as like a brush style, which is like the Phantom is a brush style. And I think of the Judge Parker as basically being like a pen style. So I don't often now get to do dramatic stuff in Judge Parker. I used to, but with the new writer and the way that he's taken the strip, it's basically mostly people sitting down on sofas talking to each other.
Would you say that, like, do you have, I think now you just said that you're doing everything digitally now. Like at one point you're doing Phantom, like complete on the boards, right? Do you have a different set of brush tools that you're using digitally for the different strips?
No.
Like they give a different line to the hair in Judge Parker versus
No, I use, what was it?
like a G-nib or something?
G-nib, and then there's one that I use called a Yeti nib that I use more on, let's see here. I use for the backgrounds because it gives you kind of a dry brush. I can show, here's a...
Yeah, we'll look at this and then we'll get ready to kick out.
I mean, I would, if Leanne could still come over, I would still be doing everything, the whole 9 yards, right? But I can't because of the way we have to work long distance. So you just have to sort of be willing to adjust your working style based upon the needs of the job. You know, I don't like doing that, but you know, that's just the way that you have to do.
Are you sharing something?
Yeah, I'm pulling up the file now.
Brett, do you have any thoughts on the lore of the daily strip versus comic pages?
I've never done that. I mean, I've obviously been around Mike doing it, and I've known lots. I've met Kniff, and I knew Al, of course. So it's a rhythm that I think I would find kind of maddening myself because it's so statico and it's little chunks, and you never get the feeling that you finished anything, obviously, because it just stretches out.
Right.
And there's a lot of restrictions on that. You can't really change the page layout or anything like that. So it's really just technical differences. But as far as storytelling and everything, it's just have the same skills to do that.
So this is a silly question while Mike's getting his stuff together. Do you think that you could take any property and turn it into a soap opera strip? Like the Spider-Man dailies would be a perfect example of that, and it works really well. But do you think you could do that with anything?
I think so, because almost all of any ongoing, continuing thing has those elements in it. So, I mean, the Game of Thrones was an incredibly violent soap opera.
Right.
See this?
So is Stranger Things is a very weird soap opera with mysterioso things. But that basic interaction of emotion and concentrating on that is right at the heart of most things that people, a wide range of people, really like. I mean,
so this is the an older Judge Parker, probably 3 or 4 years ago when I was still drawing everything in pencil. Pencil it out just like I do the Phantom, and then I would ink it traditionally. I would prefer to do that.
Yeah.
I started getting to the point where I literally had, thousands of these strips, and I was running out of room.
Right.
One of the things, again, like I have to embrace using the technology because of the need, but I would prefer to draw this way just because I enjoy drawing this way. I think I do a better drawing. And then here is this is a Sunday that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So again, I penciled this very loosely. And then up in here, I use that, I don't know if we can see it here, but if this will,
No, you got to pull it from the, yeah.
I use the Yeti brush to do all this sort of dry brushy, chunky stuff up in here.
And that's in CSP, right?
No, that's all in Clip Studio. This is
Right.
all.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. And Leanne colored that. So that, I try to make it look like it would look if I was doing it traditional.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to take into a lot of consideration the fact that I don't get the same feeling in my hand working on a piece of glass that I do if I was working with paper.
Yeah.
But, you just have to deal with. I think probably most of the people do this stuff. Terry Beatty does his strip all digital. A lot of people do stuff digital now. Just sort of what everybody wants you to do. And if I could have it all perfect, I would just prefer drawing on paper because it's so much simpler than trying to do.
What a world we live in when you have an entire strip of somebody on their cell phone.
That's the thing about the strip now. The way that Francesco writes compared to Woody. Woody didn't have as many people talking on the strip on the phone. But very often, Francesco has people talking on the phone. So there literally will be weeks going by where everybody's like this, right? Everybody's talking to somebody else. And it's just not, even if you draw a sexy gal laying on the bed, in the old days, she could be doing something with
or like twirling the phone cord or something like that.
You have the phone in the foreground and it's ringing, just having something laying there going.
Bizzed.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, it's not the same.
No. So it's sort of odd because we're still dealing with some of the cliches of drawing a comic strip. And now he's even moved it into dealing with the real time, which is something that it was never when Woody Wilson wrote it. So now everybody's wearing a mask. And he's written, as of this week, he's written into the beginning of next year. So I don't know if what he's written will actually fit with. Or you may be marching down the street with blowtorches. You might have to rewrite some of those scripts into the future.
Darth Vader helmets and hockey pads. Right?
Exactly. Oh, that would be the best Judge Parker.
Apocalypse Parker.
Right.
All right, you guys, this was great. Tim, thanks for your questions. That was a really succinct part of the episode. I get to use my $5 words before we go home. We're going to wrap it up. This was a really great episode with Michael Cho. Michael, thanks once again for indulging us. And I want to give a quick shout out to our Saturday guest. If I can get my banners. So we're going to have great digital illustrator Mike Caprati, who is a good friend of mine and has been doing amazing work in the comic book and video game space. He's been doing a lot of work for Ubisoft. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, the little thumbnail for his episode is a picture of that actor Giancarlo Esposito, who was on Do the Right Thing and Breaking Bad. He's the new villain for this game. And
he hates Baby Yoda.
And it's a painted illustration. It looks real. Mike, when I pick with you and I go, yo, that look real. Beautiful work. I can't wait to have Mike on Saturday, and I hope you join us. If you are, you know what, Mike, we have to get back to the message board to check on your contest trap to see if anybody. I haven't had a chance to look into that, but I will. But I hope that you guys are all subscribing and following us on YouTube.
And I think your friends.
Tell your friends. Signal boosting is super important. I think we just touched 200 subs on YouTube, so that's great. Let's
submarine sandwiches.
200 hoagies. So if we can march to 250, that'd be great. I'd love to see 500 by the end of
1,000.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. I think once we start getting into the thousands, then I don't know. I think we get like a coffee mug or something. So
get Patrick Stoner to come on and do our pledge drive.
I love it. We get a free pencil to pencil umbrella. So, all right, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you guys. Again, we'll be back here Saturday, 8 p.m. with Micah Prati. This has been a really great episode. I am Jamar Nicholas, and for my buddies Brett Blevins and Mike Manley, this has been Pencil to Pencil, and you've been washing in it. Thank you so much. Have a great night, and don't forget, wash your hands. Have a good night, guys.
Night.